Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody notices. There are legends in every hallway. Some wear medals pinned to pressed uniforms. Some carry scars that tell stories of distant battlefields. And some carry a mop and let the world think they're invisible. The recruits at Camp Cormac had seen him every morning for 3 weeks. Same faded Navy coveralls that had seen better decades. Same weathered baseball cap pulled low over eyes that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. To the young warriors in training rushing past him each morning, he was just part of the scenery. Background noise, the help. But if they'd bothered to look, really look, they might have noticed things. The way he moved with economy and purpose, never wasting a step. How he cleaned in patterns that maximized efficiency, like someone trained to think tactically about everything. Private Marcus Landers was one of them. 22 years old, former college football star, 6'3" of pure confidence wrapped in camouflage. Then there was Rodriguez, quick with his hands and quicker with his mouth. Thompson, built like a brick wall. Williams, the quiet one who studied technique videos until 2 a.m. They all shared one thing in common. They barely noticed the janitor. It was during the third week when everything changed. The week when instructors stopped pretending this was just training and started treating it like preparation for war. Instructor Callahan had that look in his eye that morning, the one that meant someone was about to learn something the hard way. Master Chief James Callahan was a legend. 28 years in the teams, with more classified missions than most people had birthdays. Gentlemen, Callahan's voice cut through the room like a blade. Today we're going to talk about close quarters disarmament, the kind of situation where technique matters more than strength, where one mistake costs lives. He picked up a rubber training pistol, turning it over in his scarred hands. In the real world, you won't get second chances. You'll get one opportunity to turn the tables on someone who wants to put you in the ground. He demonstrated the basic techniques with surgical precision. His movements were economical, purposeful, no wasted motion, no unnecessary flourish, just pure, devastating effectiveness. Remember, he said, completing a perfect disarm sequence, this isn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about being the smartest, about seeing what others miss. The recruits practiced among themselves, their movements awkward compared to their instructor's fluid demonstration. Landers partnered with Rodriguez, both competitive enough to push each other harder than necessary. Thompson moved like the linebacker he'd been, all power, not enough finesse. That's when Callahan's eyes swept the room again, looking for his next teaching moment. I need a volunteer, he announced. The room went silent. Volunteering for anything with Callahan usually meant becoming an example of what not to do. That's when Landers noticed him. The janitor was over by the wall, quietly wiping down a bench. Same invisible presence, same complete irrelevance to the important business happening in the center of the room. The old instincts kicked in, the need to be the guy who broke tension, who made everyone laugh. What about him? Landers said, pointing toward the janitor with a grin. Give the old guy a shot. The laughter rippled through the room. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the casual dismissal that comes from youth and inexperience. Yeah, let's see what pots and pans training teaches you about combat. Rodriguez joined in. Callahan looked from the recruits to the janitor, and for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. You sure about that? He asked, but he was already waving the janitor over. Come on up. The janitor looked up, genuine confusion crossing his weathered features. He glanced around the room as if checking whether this was some kind of mistake. Me? He asked, his voice carrying a slight rasp. You, Callahan confirmed. Slowly, the janitor set down his cleaning cloth. He straightened his back, and something about that movement caught attention. There was a precision to it that didn't quite match the humble uniform. He walked to the center of the mat with measured steps. Up close, you could see details distance had hidden. The way he held his shoulders, the careful placement of his feet, the quiet alertness in his eyes. Callahan handed him the rubber training pistol. Try to disarm me, The janitor took the weapon, holding it awkwardly, almost reluctantly. Everything about his posture screamed amateur. "I'm not sure about this," he said softly. "Maybe someone else should—" "You're fine," Callahan interrupted. But there was something in his tone now, a careful watching. "Just do your best." The recruits were still enjoying their joke. Landers had his phone out. Rodriguez was whispering something to Thompson that made them both grin. None of them were prepared for what happened next. Callahan assumed the attack position, his body coiled and ready. Years of training were written in every line of his stance. The janitor stood there, seemingly helpless, the training weapon dangling from his fingers like a foreign object. "Ready?" Callahan asked. The janitor nodded. Callahan lunged. What happened next took less than a second. As Callahan moved forward, the janitor's entire demeanor shifted like a switch being flipped. The uncertain posture vanished. The awkward grip transformed into something fluid and natural. A twist of the wrist, so subtle it barely registered. A shift of weight that seemed impossibly small. A redirection of energy that turned Callahan's momentum into his own downfall. Suddenly, Callahan was airborne. The instructor hit the mat with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent room, his breath leaving him in a surprised grunt. The training weapon was gone, somehow transferred to the janitor's other hand. The room went dead silent. "What?" Callahan started, sitting up. "What style was that?" The janitor was already helping him to his feet, offering back the training weapon with automatic courtesy. "Jujutsu," he said quietly, adjusting his glasses. "Old school. Sorry about that." "Sorry." Callahan was brushing off his uniform. "That was beautiful. Where did you learn—" But the whispers had already started. Rodriguez had pulled out his phone and was frantically scrolling. "Holy shit," he whispered. "Guys, look at this." The screen showed an old newspaper article. Master Chief Thomas Brenner retires after 32 years of service. The photograph showed a younger version of the janitor in dress blues, chest full of ribbons. The article detailed an extraordinary career. Close combat instructor to SEAL Teams 2, 4, and 8. 3 decades of training America's most elite warriors. Close combat instructor, someone read aloud, developed the modern Navy SEAL disarmament protocols, trained over 3,000 operators during his career. The silence became something heavy that pressed down on everyone's shoulders with the weight of their own ignorance. Landers felt his stomach drop. The joke that had seemed so funny 30 seconds ago now felt like the worst mistake of his young life. He looked at the janitor, Master Chief Brenner, and saw him differently. Not invisible anymore. Not background noise. A legend. The weight of realization hit the room like a shock wave. Here was a man who had literally written the book on the techniques they were struggling to learn. Every disarm sequence Callahan had demonstrated that morning had likely been refined by the quiet figure in coveralls. The protocols they'd been studying late into the night, the methods that would one day save their lives in dark corners of the world, all of it had passed through his hands first. Master Chief Brenner had been watching them fumble through movements he'd perfected decades ago, seeing their mistakes with the eye of someone who'd trained thousands of warriors before them. He'd been there all along, a living library of combat knowledge disguised as maintenance staff, and they'd been too blind to see it. "Master Chief," Callahan said, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there before, mixed with something that might have been embarrassment. "I had no idea you were—" "Retired," Brenner said simply, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Been retired for 10 years now. These days I just keep things clean." But there was a weight to those words, a suggestion that he wasn't just talking about floors and windows. The rest of the training session passed in a different atmosphere entirely. Callahan continued with his lesson, but the energy in the room had fundamentally changed. Every technique he demonstrated was suddenly put in new context. These were moves that had been refined by the quiet man who'd returned to his cleaning, tested in real combat situations, proven in places where failure meant death rather than embarrassment. When Brenner moved around the room during the remainder of the session, the recruits found themselves stealing glances. They began to notice things they'd missed before: the way he positioned himself to observe their technique, the subtle nods when someone executed a move correctly, the barely perceptible shake of his head when someone made a potentially fatal error. He wasn't just cleaning, he was still teaching, still evaluating, still carrying out his mission in the quiet way that had defined his entire career. The rest of the training session passed in a blur. Callahan continued with his lesson, but the energy had changed completely. Every technique he demonstrated was suddenly put in context. These were moves that had been refined by the quiet man in the corner, tested in real combat, proven in situations where failure meant death. When the session ended, something extraordinary happened. As Master Chief Brenner picked up his cleaning supplies and headed for the door, every recruit in the room stood up. Not because they were ordered to, not because protocol demanded it, because respect demanded it. From that day forward, things were different at Camp Cormac. When Master Chief Brenner entered a room, conversation stopped, not out of fear, but out of reverence. The recruits began to understand that heroism doesn't always announce itself with fanfare and ceremony. Sometimes it wears coveralls and carries a mop. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, waiting for the moment when its true nature is needed. Landers learned to check his assumptions. Rodriguez learned to watch before he spoke. All of them learned that the most dangerous person in the room might be the one nobody notices. They learned that legends aren't always made in the spotlight. Sometimes they're forged in silence, in the spaces between the stories, in the quiet moments when no one is watching. Master Chief Brenner never made a big deal about what happened that day. He continued his rounds, continued his work, continued to be the invisible presence that kept their world running smoothly. But now they saw him for what he really was. Not just a janitor, but a guardian. Not just support staff, but one of the warriors who had made their own dreams possible. The mop is still in the corner where he left it. The mission continues, carried forward by those who learned that day that greatness often wears the most humble disguises. Join our community of quiet warriors who understand that the greatest heroes leave the smallest footprints. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that legends aren't born in the spotlight. They're forged in shadows and revealed when darkness needs light most. Because here at Echo Bravo, we don't tell stories to impress. We tell them to honor those who serve without seeking glory, who teach without taking credit, and who remind us that true strength doesn't need to announce itself to be real. The mission continues. Will you carry it forward?